Hello, everybody. I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings. For the record, this is my third try because the first try I got interrupted by stuff, and the second try I ran out of time when I suddenly realized that I hadn't even talked about important stuff, or stuff that I consider to be important, or at least as important as you can get when talking about Lilian Jackson Braun's The Cat Who Ate Danish Modern. We are now on the official beginning of the series because, of course, you can't really have a series until you have a second installment. So I will be doing the Cat Who series as a series. And this is the second book in the series. I'll be going through these in chronological order of printing. Mostly because Lilian Jackson Braun has written these in chronological order. She has not done, as some authors will do, and write hither, thither, and yon temporally, leaving you to play catch-up and figure out when everything happened. So, in this book, we pick up where the last one left off. Qwillerish is now Coco's owner, just by virtue of, winding up with him. And he and Coco have become bestest best friends. And at the start of this book, we learn that Qwillerish is somewhat depressed because at the moment he had 4 problems. At the moment he was womanless. He had received an eviction notice, and in 3 weeks he would be homeless. At the rate the moths were feeding on his neckwear, he would soon be tieless. And if he said the wrong thing to the managing editor today, he might very well be jobless. Over 45 and jobless. It was not a cheerful prospect. So, Qwillerish shows up and goes into his meeting with the managing editor, whose real name is Harold, but everybody calls him Percy behind his back because he is a Percy. You want to kind of imagine if somebody put Percy Weasley in charge of a newspaper. It's kind of exactly like that. In any event, so let's just move on to the actual title of the book. So Qwillerish is told it's about time for him to move off of the art beat, and he'll be put in charge of this new magazine. They've got this brand new, super special Sunday supplement for 52 weeks in magazine format. And Qwillerish's response is that his mind raced ahead to the possibilities. He pictured great court trials, election campaigns, political exposés, sports spectaculars, perhaps overseas coverage. And Qwillerish says, so I suppose this will be general content, and Percy tells him general interest in its approach, but they want him to do a magazine on decorating, interior decorating. And Qwillerish is shocked and horrified. And Fran Unger, who is part of the women's department, which is something I'm not sure many newspapers have these days, because, of course, there was a time when the women reporters were the girl reporters, and women reporters focused on girl issues, on covering what's happening in the church beat, and covering interior decorating and cooking and girl things. I mean, that was what girl reporters were for, was girl stuff. So this is one of those things that I talked in the last one about this, but that periodically these books really do show the decade they were written in. In this case, the women's department, Qwillerish's attitude towards women, which is very, I hesitate to say objectification because it's very, very clear that he likes smart women he can have a conversation with, and, but, he's not interested in aggressive, unattractive women. On the other hand, I'm not sure many people are interested in aggressive, unattractive women. Mainly because if you're unattractive, being aggressive just makes you more unattractive to people. But that works both ways because nobody likes somebody who's unattractive pushing their way into their personal space. So Qwillerin is, of course, vaguely horrified by the thought of doing this, by the thought that the magazine will be entitled Gracious Abodes, and by the fact that he will be working with the women's editor, Fran Unger, who is wearing a zebra-striped hat, which puts him off because, as he says, he likes zebra stripes on zebras. So, Qwillerin manages to get a hold of the photographer who's going to be working with him, Odd Bunsen, who had recently claimed a skyscraper's flagpole to get a close-up of the 4th of July fireworks, and had an exuberance of qualities and defects that amused Qwillerin. He was the most daring of the photographers, had the loudest voice, and smoked the longest and most objectionable cigars. He was raising the largest family, and his wallet was always the flattest. So Odd Bunsen joins him, and they go and photograph the interior of the G. Verning Tate home in Muggy Swamp. And Qwillerin gets introduced to Tate, who insists on talking about his jade collection, because he is a collector. And as anyone who has ever met a collector knows, collectors love to talk about their collections. They love to go into detail about their collections and show them off, or at least most collectors do. That's partly a function, of course, of any hobbyist or person with a thing that they love, because we love to talk about the things that we love, such as me and books about vaguely crime-solving Siamese cats. And so this is the day that this is the book where we first meet the second of Qwillerin's cats, the other of Qwillerin's cats, rather. I had mentioned there would be another cat, and this is the book where we get her. Mr. Tate has a wife, and Mrs. Tate has a cat that she named Freya. But she winds up in an argument with her husband over what Freya's actual name is, because the husband insists that the cat's name is Yu, which is an ancient Chinese word for jade, and the woman has insisted that the cat's name is Freya. And by the end of the book, Qwillerin does adopt the cat. This is, of course, after Mrs. Tate has a heart attack, and Mr. Tate claims that all of his jades were stolen by the houseboy, and that all turns out to be an insurance scam, which Qwillerin manages to figure out with the help of Coco constantly pointing out particular words in the dictionary, indicating that, including the name of a kind of ape called, I believe he said, a kulacumbo, because I don't prepare for these, so I don't actually have any of these bookmarked, because, I'm not smart enough to bookmark things. And this is a kind of ape which has a bald head and black hands. And Mr. Tate is, of course, bald-headed, and he turns out to have black hands, and the other thing Coco is constantly pointing out is words for flushed and blush, which, because Mr. Tate has a tendency to be extremely red-faced for various reasons, Qwillerin takes all of these to mean that Coco is pointing a metaphorical finger at Tate, and indeed, the supposedly stolen jades had just been hidden, and Tate was going to pull off an insurance scam. In the meantime, Qwill meets Harry Noyden, and Harry Noyden is getting divorced from his wife, who is totally in love with David Like, who is one of the key characters in this, who is a decorator who later gets murdered. And Neuton gets Qwillerin out of his trouble of possibly being evicted because Qwill winds up moving into Neuton's apartment because Neuton is going to be out of town for a very long time and just lets Qwillerin stay there in exchange for Qwillerin picking up all of his mail. So you get David Like, who is a decorator and vicious, a backbiting, but incredibly charming. He's murdered, and that turns out to be Neuton's ex-wife, who had left Harry Neuton because she thought that she was going to marry David Like, and it turns out in the end that when she discovered that David Like was a horrible, horrible, possibly sociopathic person, basically he was incredibly charming, and extremely insincere. So a great person to sort of hang out with, but not exactly somebody that you should, take deep into your confidence or any of those other things. Anyways, after she discovered that David Like was never going to actually be in love with her and actually marry her, she killed him and then killed herself. And we find this out at the end of the book, again through Coco, who either witnessed part of the murder or had come in on the tail end of it, mostly because he ate part of the former Mrs. Neuton's extremely distinctive sweater, which is where the eating Danish Modern comes in, because the biggest clues in this, the clue to what was wrong with Coco and why he was acting that way, the clue to who killed David Like, and even some of the clues to what had happened to Tate's jades, a lot of these come from the fact that Coco has taken to eating wool, and he eats part of a Danish Modern chair, which is where the title actually comes from. And so the reason why Qwill takes on little Freya is after Mrs. Tate dies, her husband, Mr. Tate, G. Verning Tate, is not particularly enthused about having a cat. He doesn't like the cat. He throws the cat out of the house. And Qwill, having gone to visit a cat psychiatrist on the recommendation of Odd Bunsen, mainly because Coco had been, like I said, eating parts of chairs, he's told that Siamese are extremely social, and they need a lot of company, which they do, because they're talkative and loud and need company because they don't like yowling at nothing. They want someone to yowl at. And so after visiting the cat psychiatrist who explains that to him, he agrees to take on little Freya because, well, she doesn't have a home and he needs another cat to keep Coco company. And this is where Yum Yum comes from, because he renames her. After all, she'd already had an extremely confusing existence with you versus Freya and what her actual name was, so he just renamed her to match Coco. And for the rest of the series, Qwill has two cats, Coco and Yum Yum, who are a pair. Coco is the smart one, the bold one, the noisy one. Not that Yum Yum isn't noisy, of course, but Coco's sort of the really, really forward one, whereas Yum Yum is shy and coy and really only noisy when she actually wants, like, food or attention, whereas Coco is supposedly helping Qwillerin solve mysteries. So I will keep talking about these books, and the next one will be coming along in maybe week after next. and I'll probably create a playlist with these. So hopefully you enjoy them. If you don't, yell at me in the comments.